Hello, today we have some great tips for you for the month of July. Usually about this time of year we're telling you to water, 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 but we've had our fair share of rain this season. And in some cases we're actually seeing some very waterlogged soils and some plants actually declining and dying. And that can be a real challenge for you, especially if you have heavy clay soils. In other cases, we may not see some of the effects of the waterlogged soils until it does get a little bit hotter and drier. Some of these roots may have been damaged during this time from root rots, and then when it gets hot and dry and they need the water, they won't be able to get it and might see some wilting after that. There's not a whole lot we can do about it, unfortunately, except for in some cases where there's some really wet spots, heavy clay soil areas. You might consider putting in some kind of a drainage system to help pull the water away from those areas. Now, the latter part of July is also a good time to come in, and if you have a number of spring blooming perennials like peonies, daylilies, irises, this is a good time to come in and divide them if it's needed. Don't need to divide them and move them around unless it's absolutely necessary. Sometimes they'll become crowded though, and production will become lower, flowers will become smaller and fewer. That means that they might need to be divided at that time. So you want to dig them up, divide them up, and keep the healthiest and strongest looking roots and rhizomes and tubers and replant those, but discard the weaker and the smaller ones. Now also, at the latter part of July, this is a good time to begin thinking about a fall garden. And there's a lot of vegetables that we can plant in the latter part of July and through August that will mature in time for a harvest later in the fall. And we have a fact sheet, 6009, Fall Gardening, that you can get from your county extension office, or you can get it online, and that'll help you determine the dates that are needed and the types of plants that you can plant for a fall garden. Now, one tip for planting fall plants is because you're planting them in the middle of the summer, if you're planting them by seed, you can soak those seed overnight, and that'll give them a little extra boost before you plant them. And then when you get them in the ground, you'll want to put a light mulch over the top of them to help keep the soil from crusting, to help keep those soil temperatures a little bit cooler and keep them a little bit more moist, so that those plants have a good chance of getting established. Of course, insects and disease problems will be active at that time, so you want to watch for those to help keep those away from the plants and give the chance of an opportunity to get going and have success. If you're growing fruits in your landscape, this is a time when you need to pay attention to or continue, hopefully, those spray programs that you've already initiated earlier in the year. Again, with all the moisture that we've had this year, there's probably lots of problems that could be occurring on our fruits, such as foliar diseases and etc. And you don't want to quit those spray programs too early. You need to continue those right up to almost the time of harvest, but you need to make sure that you read and follow the label directions very carefully. Especially pay attention to the number of days that are needed between the last spray and the days of harvest. Now also, there's still plenty to do in the turf areas as well. We have lots of things that we need to pay attention to. If you're maintaining cool season grasses, as we get into hotter, drier weather, you want to raise your mowing height to 2.5 to 3 inches. If you're in a shady area, it even benefits to raise that more, maybe up to 3.5 inches. Your warm season grasses, 1.5 to 2 inches would also be very beneficial during the hotter, drier parts of the month. And the other problem that we can have in cool season grasses this time of year is brown patch. Again, with all this moisture, it typically shows up in areas where there's poor air circulation, high moisture and high humidity. We can get some brown patch problems or fungal disease. Those can be easily controlled with fungicides, but anything you can do to help manage it so that there's better air circulation, more light to help dry out the area and keep the humidity level down will be helpful also. And if you're going to establish a new warm season grass this year, you want to complete that by the end of July to ensure that you get good establishment before the winter weather hits this winter. If you're managing a compost pile in your landscape, which is highly recommended, take that yard waste and grass clippings, etc., and throw them in a pile and compost them so that you can use them as amendments and maybe even as a mulch out in other areas of the garden. One of the key factors of making it work well is making sure the pile stays moist. And again, we've had lots of rain this year, so maybe up to this point anyway, that's been not a serious problem and maybe been too wet in some cases. But as we again hopefully get into some drier weather, make sure that you keep the compost pile moist and turn it regularly so that it will compost properly. You need to get that heat built up throughout the pile. That's what helps break down the material and gives those organisms inside a chance to do their thing. There's all kinds of different types of and styles of composting bins and piles, and you can just throw them off into the side of the yard and create this nice little pile, and over time it will break down. You can use a series of bins like we have here that you can rotate them and progress from the newest waste down to the composted waste, so you always have a pile breaking down and you always have some compost to use. And then there's all kinds of real fancy compost bins out there. This is the compost tumbler, a really nice unit here that is metal and plastic, and you can throw your compost material in here in the top, and then it rotates. You have the handle that helps makes it easier for you to turn rather than having to take a pitchfork and turn it around by hand. But this also helps. In some cases, this might be a little bit faster process if you again stay on top of it, keep it moist, and turn it regularly.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.